The lunch rush at the Blue Note was in full swing as Melody Parker hurried through the double doors of the kitchen, balancing 3 plates along her arm. She was 3 days into her new waitressing job, and her feet already ached in the sensible black shoes she'd bought from the thrift store down the street from her apartment. "Order up for table 7, called out Hank, the head chef, sliding another plate onto the counter. Melody nodded, her dark brown hair falling loose from where she'd tucked it behind her ear. "Just a second," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. The Blue Note wasn't just any restaurant. Housed in what used to be an old theater building downtown, it had become the place where business deals were sealed, where politicians were spotted, and where the wealthy came to see and be seen. At the center of the dining room sat a gleaming black grand piano, a beautiful instrument that, as far as Melody could tell, mostly served as expensive decoration. She carefully delivered her 3 plates to a table of businesswomen, who barely looked up from their conversation about quarterly reports. Melody didn't mind. Being invisible sometimes made the job easier. As she turned to grab the plate for table 7, she caught sight of her reflection in one of the large mirrors that lined the wall. 28 years old, and here she was starting over again. The crisp white shirt and black pants uniform wasn't exactly what she'd imagined wearing at this point in her life. 6 years ago, she'd been in her final year at the music conservatory, with professors calling her one of the most promising pianists of her generation. Then came the phone call about her grandmother, the woman who'd raised her after her parents died, the woman who'd scraped together every penny to pay for piano lessons. Stroke, severe, needs full-time care. The choice hadn't really been a choice at all. You gonna grab that, order, or just stare at yourself all day? The sharp voice belonged to Kathy, a waitress in her 40s who seemed to take personal offense at Melody's presence. "Sorry," Melody said, hurrying to grab the plate for table 7. The Blue Note had a certain rhythm to it, not unlike music. There were crescendos during the lunch and dinner rushes, quieter passages in between, and always the underlying current of clinking glasses and murmured conversations. Melody was still learning the tempo, and it showed. As she approached table 7, a middle-aged couple celebrating what appeared to be an anniversary, she put on her best smile. "Here's your seared salmon with asparagus," she said, placing the plate carefully in front of the woman. "Can I get you anything else?" The man looked up at her, his eyes lingering a moment too long on her face. "Actually, we ordered the steak, not the salmon." Melody felt her stomach drop. "I'm so sorry. Let me fix that right away. New here, aren't you?" the woman asked, not unkindly. Melody nodded. "3rd day." "Well, 3rd time's the charm," the man said with a wink that made Melody want to disappear into the floor. Back in the kitchen, Hank looked at the returned plate, and then at Melody. "Table mix-up again?" "I'm sorry," she said, hating how small her voice sounded. "Hank wasn't cruel, just busy. Look, you need to get the hang of this soon. Mr. Davis doesn't keep people who can't keep up." He nodded toward the office at the back of the kitchen, where the owner of the Blue Note spent most of his time looking over accounts and making sure his investment kept paying off. Melody had only met Mr. Davis briefly during her interview. He was a serious man in his 50s who had eyed her resume with suspicion. Not much restaurant experience, he'd noted. "I'm a fast learner," she'd promised. What she hadn't mentioned was why there was a 6-year gap in her work history, where her music career should have been. Those years had been spent in her grandmother's small house, administering medications, helping with physical therapy, reading aloud when Grandma Rose's eyesight began to fail, and playing the old upright piano in the evenings because it was the only thing that seemed to bring peace to both of them. After her grandmother passed away 4 months ago, Melody found herself adrift. The music world had moved on without her. Former classmates were now performing in concert halls while she was figuring out how to pay the stack of medical bills that remained. "Here's the steak for table 7, Hank said, pulling her back to the present. "And don't mix it up with table 9's pasta." The afternoon stretched on. By 3 o'clock, the lunch crowd had thinned, and Melody finally had a moment to catch her breath. She was wiping down a table when she noticed a group of 4 men in expensive suits being seated at one of the best tables, right near the piano. "That's the Westridge Development Group," whispered Zoe, another waitress who had been somewhat friendly to Melody. "They're regulars. Big tippers, but they can be demanding." "Thanks for the heads up," Melody said. "Don't thank me yet. Kathy usually takes their table, but she's on break, so they're all yours." Melody straightened her shirt and walked over to the table, notepad in hand. "Good afternoon, gentlemen. Welcome to the Blue Note. Can I start you with some drinks?" The man at the head of the table, with salt and pepper hair and a watch that probably cost more than Melody's yearly rent, looked her up and down. "You're new." It wasn't a question, but Melody nodded anyway. "Yes, sir. Just started this week." "We'll have the usual," said one of the other men. Melody hesitated. "I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with your usual order yet." The first man sighed dramatically. "4 scotch, neat." "The Macallan 18, not the 12. "Right away," she said, writing it down even though the order was simple enough to remember. As she turned to leave, she heard one of them mutter something that made the others laugh. She didn't catch the words, but the tone was clear enough. At the bar, the bartender, a guy named Pete who looked like he'd been mixing drinks since before Melody was born, saw her approach. "Let me guess, the Westridge boys want their scotch?" Melody smiled, relieved. "The Macallan 18, not the 12, got it." "Hey, you're doing fine, by the way," Pete said as he pulled out the bottle. "First week is always rough. Doesn't help that Kathy's been telling everyone you won't last a month." "Why would she do that?" "She doesn't even know me," Pete shrugged. "She was hoping her niece would get the job. Nothing personal." But it felt personal when Melody overheard Kathy talking to Zoe later in the break room. "She keeps mixing up orders. Davis won't put up with that for long," Kathy was saying. "Did you see her try to carry those 4 plates at once?" "Amateur hour." Melody cleared her throat as she entered, and both women had the decency to look slightly embarrassed. "Just getting some water," Melody said, keeping her voice light. "Oh, Melody," Kathy said, her tone suddenly sweet. "We were just saying the dinner shift is going to be busy tonight. There's a birthday party coming in, and that piano's finally going to get some use. Davis hired some guy who plays all the standard classics." Something stirred in Melody's chest at the mention of the piano. Since starting at the Blue Note, she'd been careful not to stare at it too long, not to think about how her fingers would feel on those keys. "That's nice," she said, filling her water bottle at the cooler. "You like music?" Zoe asked. "Everyone likes music," Melody replied with a small smile, unwilling to reveal more. Later, as her shift was ending and the evening staff was arriving, Melody found herself alone in the dining room for a brief moment. The dinner crowd wouldn't arrive for another half hour. The piano sat there, lid closed, waiting. Before she could talk herself out of it, Melody walked over and lightly ran her fingers across the glossy black surface. 6 years was a long time to step away from something you love. Her grandmother had urged her to keep playing, to go back to school. But Melody couldn't bear the thought of leaving her alone. "It's not being used right now, if you're wondering." Melody jumped and turned to see Mr. Davis standing a few feet away. She hadn't heard him approach. "I'm sorry, I was just—" "Do you play?" he asked, his expression unreadable. Melody hesitated. "A little," she said, the lie bitter on her tongue. "How do you explain that music had once been your entire life, your future, your breath?" Mr. Davis nodded, seeming uninterested. "Well, we have a professional coming in tonight. You should be clocked out by now, shouldn't you?" "Yes, sir. I was just finishing up." As she gathered her things and headed for the door, Melody glanced back at the piano one last time. The evening pianist had arrived, a middle-aged man in a tuxedo who was arranging his sheet music with methodical precision. He would play the expected pieces, a bit of Mozart, some Gershwin, nothing too challenging or surprising. The customers would barely notice. Outside, the September evening was turning cool. Melody pulled her jacket tighter and began the 20-minute walk to her small apartment. Tomorrow would be another day of carrying plates, smiling through rude comments, and trying to learn the rhythm of a place that felt both foreign and strangely familiar. What she didn't know was that in just a few days, everything would change. The piano that sat largely ignored in the Blue Note was about to become the center of attention, and so was she. A week into her job at the Blue Note, and Melody was finally starting to find her rhythm. She'd memorized the regular customers' orders, learned which tables belonged to which server's section, and figured out how to balance 4 plates at once without disaster. Small victories, but they mattered. "Table 12 needs more water," called Zoe as they passed each other between the kitchen and dining room. "On it," Melody replied, grabbing a pitcher. She was tired but determined. Last night she'd practiced carrying stacks of books around her tiny apartment, trying to build the arm strength and balance she needed for this job. Her grandmother would have laughed at the sight, Melody Parker, once destined for concert halls, now training to be a better waitress. The evening was busier than usual. A local tech company had reserved the largest section for a celebration dinner. Something about a successful product launch that had the men in button-ups and the women in sleek dresses buzzing with excitement and ordering champagne by the bottle. Mr. Davis himself had emerged from his office to greet them, all smiles and handshakes. The pianist will begin at 7. Melody overheard him telling someone who appeared to be in charge. And we've prepared the special menu you requested. Melody was assigned to help with their section alongside Kathy, who hadn't warmed to her in the slightest. Don't mess this up, Kathy warned as they arranged extra place settings. These people spend more on dinner than you make in a month. And they're friends with the mayor. I'll be careful, Melody promised. And she was, right up until 8:30 when everything fell apart. The evening had been going well. The tech company people were 3 courses in, the alcohol flowing freely. The pianist played tasteful background music that nobody really listened to. Melody had just delivered a tray of desserts to one end of the long table when she heard her name. Melody, can you take these drinks to the other end? Pete called from the bar, gesturing to a tray loaded with colorful cocktails. She hesitated. She'd already been serving food, not drinks, but it was clearly all hands on deck. Nodding, she carefully picked up the tray. It was heavier than she expected, the glasses filled to the brim with expensive liquor and garnishes. Melody took a deep breath and began making her way around the table. The group had gotten louder as the night progressed, people standing up, moving around, laughing. She was halfway to her destination when a man backed up from his chair without looking, bumping directly into her elbow. Time seemed to slow down. Melody felt the tray tip, felt herself try to correct, but it was too late. The drink slid in a colorful cascade, splashing directly onto a woman in a white dress who let out a shriek that cut through the restaurant like a knife. The music stopped. Conversations halted. Every head turned. Oh my God. My dress! The woman cried, jumping up. Blue and red liquids dripped down the expensive fabric. I'm so sorry, Melody gasped, setting down the now empty tray and grabbing napkins. It was an accident. Do you have any idea how much this cost? The woman snapped, snatching the napkins from Melody's hands. Melody felt her face burning. Please let me help. You've done enough, said a man who appeared to be the woman's date. He was tall, with carefully styled hair and the kind of tan that came from vacations, not work. He looked at Melody like she was something stuck to the bottom of his shoe. Then came the laugh. It started with one person, then spread, not everyone, but enough. Not kind laughter, but the cruel kind that said, "This is exactly what we expected from someone like you." Typical, someone muttered. Can't get good help these days. The tall man smirked at his companions. Stick to carrying one thing at a time, honey. Know your limitations. More laughter. Mr. Davis appeared, his face a mask of controlled panic. Mrs. Whitmore, please accept my deepest apologies. We'll cover any cleaning costs, of course. He turned to Melody, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Clean this up and then see me in my office. Melody's hand shook as she mopped up the spilled drinks. The pianist had resumed playing, louder now, as if trying to cover the awkward scene. Conversation slowly started again, but she could feel eyes on her back, could hear the whispers. Kathy passed by, leaning in to whisper, Told you that you wouldn't last a month. By the time Melody had cleaned everything, Mrs. Whitmore and her group had moved to the bar area, where Mr. Davis was offering complimentary drinks. Melody walked to his office, each step feeling heavier than the last. The office was small but neat, with framed reviews of the Blue Note on the walls. Mr. Davis sat behind his desk. Looking tired? Sit down, he said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. Melody sat, hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. That was Barbara Whitmore, he said. Her husband is on the city council. They're investors in this restaurant. I'm truly sorry, Melody said. The man bumped into me, but I should have been more careful. Mr. Davis sighed. Look, Melody, your application said you needed this job badly. I took a chance because you seemed earnest despite your lack of experience. But this isn't working out. The words hit her like a physical blow. Please, Mr. Davis, I'm getting better every day. This was one mistake. One very public, very expensive mistake. He rubbed his temples. I can't fire you tonight. We're short-staffed as it is. But I'll be making some calls tomorrow. You can finish your shift. Melody nodded, not trusting herself to speak without her voice breaking. She stood up, feeling numb, and Melody, Mr. Davis added as she reached the door, stay away from the Whitmore group for the rest of the night. Back in the dining room, the party had recovered from the incident. The night continued, but for Melody, everything had changed. She moved through her tasks mechanically, taking orders, delivering food, all while a voice in her head kept repeating, "What now? What now? What now?" She'd spent most of her savings on her grandmother's funeral. The medical bills were still piling up. Her apartment's rent was due next week. During a brief lull, Melody found herself standing near the piano. The pianist, an older man named Richard, who had barely spoken 2 words to her, was taking a break. The instrument sat silent, almost inviting. "Quite a night, huh?" Pete said, coming to stand beside her. The bartender had been one of the few people who'd shown her any kindness. "I'm getting fired tomorrow," Melody said quietly. Pete winced. "Yeah, I figured as much after the Whitmore incident." Tough break. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the party across the room. Mr. Whitmore was now holding court, gesturing grandly as he told some story that had his companions hanging on every word. "You know what's funny?" Melody said, not feeling amused at all. "When I was younger, I used to perform in front of hundreds of people. I never got nervous, never made mistakes, but put me in a room with a tray of drinks and I fall apart." Pete looked at her curiously. "Performed? What did you do, theater?" Melody shook her head, realizing she'd said too much. "It doesn't matter now." She glanced at her watch. "I should get back to work. For as long as that lasts." The rest of the evening dragged on. By 11, the tech company party was winding down. They'd left a decent tip, at least, though Melody suspected that was more due to the restaurant's policy of suggested gratuity for large parties than any satisfaction with her service. As the last guests were leaving, Melody began wiping down tables, her movements slow with exhaustion and defeat. The Whitmore couple walked past, not even glancing in her direction. The tall man with the tan, however, stopped. "Hey, waitress," he called. When Melody looked up, he was holding out a $20 bill. "For your trouble." The way he said it, the smirk on his face, made it clear this wasn't kindness. This was the final humiliation. A man who probably spent more on his haircuts than she made in a day, offering her what he considered charity. "No thank you," she said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. He raised an eyebrow. "Pride won't pay your bills, sweetheart. Might want to reconsider, especially since you'll be job hunting tomorrow." He tossed the bill onto the table she was cleaning and walked away, chuckling to himself. Melody stared at the money, something hot and unfamiliar burning in her chest. It wasn't just anger, it was a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. Determination. She picked up the 20 and walked over to the bar where Pete was closing out the register. "Can I make an announcement over the speaker system?" she asked. Pete looked surprised. "What kind of announcement?" "A going-away present to myself." He studied her face for a moment, then shrugged. "System's over there. Just press the button to talk. But check with Davis first, he's in the back." Melody glanced toward the kitchen. Mr. Davis would never approve. And why should she care about his approval now anyway? But as she reached for the microphone, she hesitated. Making a scene wouldn't get her job back. It wouldn't pay her bills. It would just burn a bridge she might need to cross again someday. She set the microphone down and instead walked over to the piano. Richard had left for the night, but the instrument remained, its lid propped open. No one was paying attention to her. The few remaining staff were busy cleaning up, and the last guests were collecting their coats. Melody sat down on the bench, running her fingers lightly over the keys without pressing down. It had been so long. What if she couldn't play anymore? What if she'd lost whatever talent she'd once had? Then again, what did she have to lose? Taking a deep breath, she pressed down on the keys, just a simple C major chord. The sound resonated through the nearly empty restaurant, pure and clear. She played another chord, then another, her fingers remembering what her mind had tried to forget. And then, almost without conscious thought, she began to play for real, not the background music Richard had been providing all night, but Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, a piece that had once been her signature at recitals. The music flowed from her fingers like water breaking through a dam, years of silence giving way to sound. She closed her eyes, letting muscle memory guide her. Each note was both familiar and new. like meeting an old friend after a long absence. She was so lost in the music that she didn't notice when the conversation stopped, didn't see the heads turning in her direction, didn't realize that everyone still in the Blue Note was now watching the waitress who had spilled drinks just hours before as she transformed before their eyes. The first person to notice Melody at the piano was Pete. He stopped counting the night's tips, his hands frozen mid-count as the beautiful notes filled the restaurant. This wasn't the usual background music they played at the Blue Note. This was something else entirely. Zoe, who had been wiping down the bar, turned next. Her cloth stilled on the polished surface as she stared open-mouthed at Melody. "Is that?" she whispered to Pete. He nodded, not taking his eyes off Melody. "Yeah." By the time Melody reached the middle section of the nocturne, every remaining staff member had stopped working. Even the kitchen staff peeked through the swinging doors. The handful of lingering customers who had been about to leave now stood transfixed, coats draped over their arms, forgotten. Melody still hadn't opened her eyes. The music poured from her fingers as naturally as breathing. Each note perfectly placed, each phrase shaped with the kind of sensitivity that couldn't be taught. This was what she had been trained to do, what she had once lived for, before life had taken her in a different direction. The piece built to its gentle climax, then eased back down like waves receding from the shore. As she played the final chord, letting it resonate through the room before lifting her hands from the keys, Melody finally opened her eyes and realized she had an audience. The first thing she saw was Mr. Davis standing by the kitchen door, his expression unreadable. Beside him was Kathy, for once without a snippy comment ready. Then she noticed the small crowd of customers and staff gathered around the piano, all watching her with something like wonder. Among them, standing at the back with his $20 bill still clutched in his hand, was the tan man who had mocked her earlier. His smirk was gone, replaced by a look of genuine surprise. No one spoke. The silence after the music felt heavier somehow, loaded with unasked questions. It was Mr. Davis who finally broke it. He walked slowly to the piano, stopping a few feet away from Melody. "Where," he said quietly, "did you learn to play like that?" Melody's heart was pounding. She hadn't meant to cause a scene, hadn't meant to draw attention to herself. She just wanted a moment of connection with the person she used to be. "I studied at the conservatory," she answered, her voice barely above a whisper. "A long time ago." "A long time ago," Mr. Davis repeated. He looked at her differently now, as if seeing her for the first time. "And you've been waiting tables since then?" Melody hesitated. How could she explain the years spent caring for her grandmother, the slow fade of her musical dreams? The way life sometimes makes choices for you that you never imagined? "It's complicated," she said finally. A woman in a blue dress stepped forward from the small crowd. "That was Chopin, wasn't it?" "Beautifully played," Melody nodded. "Thank you." "Play something else," someone called out. Mr. Davis looked around at the gathered group, then back at Melody. Something shifted in his expression, a calculation being made, an opportunity recognized. "Yes," he said, "play something else." It wasn't exactly a request, but it wasn't quite a demand either. Melody glanced at the clock. It was nearly midnight. She was exhausted, emotionally drained from the disaster earlier, and now exposed in a way she hadn't been in years. But the piano keys were under her fingers again, and that feeling, that rush of connecting with music, was like coming home after a long, cold journey. She took a deep breath and began to play again. This time she chose Debussy's Clair de Lune, its delicate opening notes floating through the restaurant like moonlight on water. As she played, she noticed more movement around her. Someone dimmed the lights slightly. Pete quietly served drinks to the lingering customers, who had now settled back at their tables to listen. Mr. Davis made a phone call, speaking in hushed tones that she couldn't make out over the music. When she finished the Debussy, there was applause, real applause, not the polite kind that often followed background music, but the genuine appreciation of an audience moved by what they'd heard. "Another," someone called. Melody looked at Mr. Davis, who nodded encouragingly, and so she played again. And again. She moved from classical pieces to jazz standards, testing the limits of what her fingers remembered. With each piece, she felt more of herself coming back, the part of her that had been dormant for so long now fully awake and singing. She didn't notice when the tan man left, didn't see the thoughtful expression on his face as he looked back one, Last time before stepping out into the night, it was almost 1 in the morning when Mr. Davis finally approached the piano again. "Think that's enough for tonight," he said, but his tone was gentle. "The staff needs to finish closing." Melody nodded, suddenly aware of how tired she was. Her fingers were stiff from the unaccustomed exercise, and her back ached from sitting on the piano bench for so long. "I'm sorry for keeping everyone," she said, standing up. "Don't apologize," Mr. Davis replied. "Why don't you come to my office before you leave? I think we need to talk." As the remaining customers reluctantly departed and the staff resumed their closing duties, Melody helped with the final cleanup. No one quite knew what to say to her. Kathy avoided eye contact entirely. Zoe just gave her an awkward smile and a thumbs up. Pete, however, stopped her as she passed the bar. "That was something else," he said. "Why didn't you say anything about being a professional pianist?" Melody shrugged. "Because I'm not. Not anymore." "Could have fooled me," Pete replied, "and everyone else in here tonight." When the last table was wiped down and the floors were swept, Melody made her way to Mr. Davis's office. The door was open and he was sitting behind his desk writing something in a notebook. He looked up when she knocked on the door frame. "Come in, Melody. Close the door behind you." She did as he asked, then sat in the same chair she'd occupied hours earlier when he'd all but fired her. It felt like a lifetime ago. "So," Mr. Davis said, setting down his pen, "you've been hiding quite a talent." "I wasn't hiding it exactly," she replied. "It just wasn't relevant to serving tables, until tonight." He leaned back in his chair. "Tell me about your background." The full version this time, so she did. She told him about starting piano lessons at age 7, about the scholarships and competitions, about being accepted into the prestigious conservatory. And then she told him about the phone call about her grandmother, about the choice to step away from music to become a full-time caregiver, about the 6 years that followed. "She died 4 months ago," Melody concluded. "I've been trying to figure out what to do next ever since. But with the medical bills and everything else, well, waiting tables seemed like the most practical option." Mr. Davis listened without interrupting. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "Life takes unexpected turns," he said. "I understand that better than you might think." He gestured to a photograph on his desk that Melody hadn't noticed before, a younger version of himself holding a saxophone. "I was in a jazz quartet in my 20s. Had big dreams. What happened?" Melody asked. He smiled ruefully. "Reality. Bills, a family to support. The restaurant business turned out to be more reliable than gigs." He tapped his fingers on the desk, a rhythmic pattern that suggested the musician in him was never fully silenced. "But that doesn't mean we should forget who we really are." There was a moment of silence between them, a shared understanding passing unspoken. "Here's what I'm thinking," Mr. Davis finally said. "Richard, our regular pianist, has been wanting to cut back his hours. He's getting older and 5 nights a week is too much for him." Melody's heart began to beat faster. "I could use someone to cover for him a couple of nights a week, Thursday and Sunday to start with. The pay is better than waiting tables. Not concert hall money, but decent. And you could keep your serving shifts the other days if you want." It took Melody a moment to find her voice. "Are you offering me a job as a pianist?" "I'm offering you a chance," Mr. Davis corrected. "Based on what I heard tonight, you're overqualified for the position. But it might be a way back into the world you left." "Even after the incident with Mrs. Whitmore?" Melody asked, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. Mr. Davis's expression turned thoughtful. "You know, the strangest thing happened after your impromptu performance. Mrs. Whitmore's husband called me. Apparently, one of their friends had taken a video of you playing and sent it to him. He was quite impressed." "He was?" "He suggested, and I quote, that talent like that shouldn't be wasted on carrying trays. He also mentioned that his wife is on the board of the city's Arts Council. They organize concerts in the park during the summer." Melody felt dizzy, as if the world was shifting around her. "I don't understand. Why would they help me after I ruined Mrs. Whitmore's dress?" Mr. Davis smiled. "Sometimes people can surprise you, especially when you surprise them first." He pulled out a business card from his desk drawer and slid it across to her. "Mr. Whitmore said you should call him next week. He'd like to discuss some opportunities." Melody stared at the card, her vision blurring slightly with unexpected tears. "So," Mr. Davis said, bringing her attention back to him, "what do you say? Thursday and Sunday nights at the piano, starting this week." Outside the office window, the first hint of dawn was appearing on the horizon. A new day, and suddenly, unexpectedly, a new beginning. "Yes," Melody said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Yes, I'd like that very much." As she left the Blue Note that morning, the street still quiet in the early hour, Melody felt something she hadn't experienced in years. A sense of possibility, of doors opening rather than closing. The weight on her shoulders seemed lighter somehow. She'd come to the Blue Note looking for just another job, a way to pay the bills. Instead, she'd found a path back to the person she used to be, or perhaps to the person she was always meant to become. And it had started with a moment of humiliation, with laughter directed at a waitress who didn't seem to belong. They weren't laughing anymore. Word spread quickly about the waitress who could play piano like a concert performer. By Thursday night, Melody's first official night as the Blue Note's pianist, the restaurant was packed. People who had made reservations weeks in advance found themselves seated next to walk-ins who had heard the rumors and wanted to see if they were true. Mr. Davis was practically glowing as he greeted guests at the door. The Blue Note hadn't seen a crowd like this on a Thursday in years. In the back room that served as both an employee break area and a changing room, Melody stared at her reflection in the small mirror. She barely recognized herself. Instead of the black pants and white shirt of the waitstaff, she wore a simple blue dress. Nothing fancy, but worlds apart from her uniform. "Knock, knock," came Zoe's voice from the doorway. "You decent." "Come in," Melody said, turning away from the mirror. Zoe whistled as she entered. "Look at you, all dressed up. How are you feeling?" The truth was, Melody didn't know how she felt. Excited, terrified, grateful, nervous. All of these emotions swirled inside her like leaves caught in a whirlwind. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "It's been a long time since I performed for a real audience." "Well, you've got a big one tonight," Zoe said, peeking through the door toward the dining room. "I've never seen so many people in here on a weeknight." Even Kathy's impressed, though she'd never admit it. Melody smiled weakly. The pressure was building inside her chest. What if Tuesday night had been a fluke? What if she froze up in front of all these people who had come specifically to hear her play? "Hey," Zoe said, noticing her expression. "You've got this. I heard you the other night, remember? You're the real deal." Before Melody could respond, there was another knock at the door. This time it was Mr. Davis, looking uncharacteristically nervous himself. "We're ready whenever you are," he said. "No rush, but, well, people are asking when you'll start." Melody took a deep breath and nodded. "I'm ready." As she followed Mr. Davis through the kitchen and toward the dining room, Pete gave her a thumbs up from behind the bar. Even Hank, the perpetually grumpy chef, poked his head out from the kitchen to wish her luck. The dining room fell silent as she approached the piano. All eyes turned to her, expectant, curious, skeptical. Among the crowd, she spotted Mrs. Whitmore and her husband, sitting at a prime table near the piano. Mrs. Whitmore gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. Mr. Davis stepped forward to address the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, the Blue Note is proud to present our very own Melody Parker." There was polite applause as Melody took her seat at the piano. The glossy black surface reflected the soft lighting of the restaurant, and for a moment she felt a flash of imposter syndrome. Who was she to sit here, pretending to be a professional after 6 years away from serious playing? But then her fingers touched the keys and all doubt melted away. She began with a Beethoven sonata, the Pathétique, its dramatic opening commanding immediate attention. The room, already quiet, seemed to hold its collective breath as she moved from the powerful introduction to the tender, lyrical theme that followed. Melody had forgotten what it felt like to have an audience hanging on every note. As a waitress, she had been invisible, background noise in other people's evenings. Now she was the focus, the reason they were here. The realization was both terrifying and thrilling. As she played, memories flooded back, recitals at the conservatory, competitions where she'd placed first or second, the hours upon hours of practice that had shaped her young life. She remembered her grandmother sitting in the front row at every performance, her face beaming with pride. The thought of her grandmother brought a lump to Melody's throat, but rather than disrupting her playing, it infused the music with emotion. This was for her, the woman who had sacrificed so much to give Melody opportunities, who had never once complained during those difficult final years. When the sonata concluded, There was a moment of silence followed by enthusiastic applause. Melody looked up, surprised by the response. She'd been so lost in the music that she'd almost forgotten where she was. She moved on to more accessible pieces. Some Gershwin, a bit of jazz, even a few contemporary songs arranged for piano. The audience was with her the entire way, their appreciation growing with each piece. During a brief break, Mr. Davis approached the piano with a glass of water for her. "You're a hit," he said quietly, his eyes bright with satisfaction. "I've already had 3 people ask if you'll be playing regularly." "What did you tell them?" Melody asked, taking a grateful sip of water. "That we're very fortunate to have discovered your talent," he replied with a wink, "and that yes, you'll be here Thursdays and Sundays. I've already had to start a waiting list for this Sunday's reservations." As Mr. Davis walked away, Melody noticed a man approaching the piano. It was the tan businessman who had mocked her the night she spilled the drinks, the one who had offered her the $20. Up close, she could see that his tan was indeed from a bottle, and his carefully styled hair had more product in it than she'd initially realized. "Miss Parker," he said, extending his hand. "Tom Reynolds." Melody hesitated, then shook his hand briefly. "I owe you an apology," he continued, surprising her. "I was less than kind the other night." "It's forgotten," Melody said, though in truth his words had stung deeply at the time. "No, it shouldn't be," he insisted. "I made assumptions about you that were obviously wrong. Very wrong." He glanced at the piano. "You're incredibly talented." "Thank you," she replied, unsure what else to say. "I'm actually in the music industry," Tom said, pulling out a business card similar to the one Mr. Whitmore had given her. "I help run a small record label. We're always looking for new talent, especially in the crossover classical market." Melody stared at the card. 2 job offers in 1 week after months of rejections? "I'm not really looking to record anything right now," she said carefully. "I'm just getting back into playing after a long break." Tom nodded. "No pressure. But when you're ready, if you're ready, give me a call. We could set up a proper audition." He slid the card across the piano top. "Consider it my way of making amends." Before she could respond, he turned and walked back to his table, where several well-dressed people waited. One of them leaned in as he sat down, obviously asking about his conversation with her. The second half of Melody's performance went by in a blur. The crowd thinned slightly as the evening wore on, but many stayed until the very end, when she played her final piece, a soulful rendition of Summertime that had people swaying in their seats. The applause was enthusiastic and genuine. Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore approached as she was gathering her sheet. "Music, wonderful performance," Mrs. Whitmore said, her tone warmer than Melody would have expected from someone whose designer dress she'd ruined. "Richard is talented, of course, but you bring something fresh to the piano." "Thank you," Melody replied, still slightly wary. "And I'm truly sorry about your dress." Mrs. Whitmore waved a dismissive hand. "Dresses can be replaced. Talent like yours is rare." Her husband stepped forward. "Did Davis give you my card?" Melody nodded. "Good, call my office next week. The Arts Council is planning the summer concert series, and I think you'd be perfect for one of the spotlight performances." As they walked away, Melody felt as though she'd stepped into someone else's life. Just days ago, these people had been looking through her, or worse, laughing at her. Now they were offering her opportunities she thought were long gone. The restaurant emptied gradually. The staff cleaned around her as she sat at the piano, not quite ready to leave. Pete brought her a glass of champagne. "On the house," he said. "You deserve it after that performance." Melody smiled and accepted the glass. "Thanks, Pete. So are you going to quit the waitressing now?" he asked, leaning against the piano. "Seems like you've got bigger fish to fry." It was a question Melody had been asking herself all night. The truth was, despite the applause and the business cards and the praise, she wasn't sure what came next. The path that had once seemed so clear, conservatory, competitions, concert halls, now felt distant and unfamiliar. "I don't know," she admitted. "Mr. Davis said I could keep my serving shifts if I wanted." Pete looked surprised. "Why would you want to? You clearly belong at that piano, not carrying plates." "Maybe," Melody said, running her fingers lightly over the keys. "But there's something to be said for keeping your feet on the ground. Besides, I've got bills to pay, and 2 nights of piano playing won't cover everything." Pete shrugged. "Fair enough. Just don't let Kathy boss you around anymore. You've got leverage now." Melody laughed, the sound surprising her. It felt good to laugh after so many months of struggle and worry. As she left the Blue Note that night, several people stopped her on the street, guests who had stayed to the end of her performance and recognized her as she stepped outside. "You were amazing in there," one woman said, touching her arm. "I'll be back to hear you again." By the time Melody reached her apartment, she was exhausted but buzzed with a kind of energy she hadn't felt in years. She kicked off her shoes and collapsed onto her small sofa, her mind replaying moments from the evening. Her phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. "You crushed it tonight. The whole staff is talking about it. Even Kathy admitted you were good." Melody smiled and texted back a simple, "Thanks." Then she noticed she had several missed calls from an unknown number. There was a voicemail too. Curious, she pressed play. "Hello, Ms. Parker," said an unfamiliar female voice. "This is Lisa Chen from City Arts Magazine. We heard about your performance at the Blue Note tonight and would love to do a feature on you for our local talent section. Please call me back at this number when you have a chance. Thank you." Melody stared at her phone in disbelief. A magazine wanted to interview her? After just one night? As she got ready for bed, Melody caught sight of herself in the bathroom mirror. She looked different somehow. Her posture straighter, her eyes brighter, as if some essential part of herself that had been dormant was now wide awake. "What would Grandma say?" she whispered to her reflection. The answer came immediately in her grandmother's warm, no-nonsense voice. "I'd say it's about time, sweetheart. It's about time." 3 months had passed since Melody's first official performance at the Blue Note. Spring had turned to summer, and the city was alive with outdoor concerts and festivals. The Blue Note had removed the Thursday and Sunday-only qualifier from Melody's schedule. She now played 5 nights a week, by popular demand. Tonight was special, though. Tonight was the summer concert at Riverside Park, organized by the city's Arts Council, and Melody Parker was the featured performer. "Are you sure this looks okay?" Melody asked, turning in front of the full-length mirror in the small dressing room backstage. She wore a floor-length burgundy dress, the most expensive piece of clothing she'd ever owned. The city had provided a budget for her performance attire, something she was still getting used to. Zoe, who had become a close friend over the past months, nodded approvingly. "It looks amazing. You look amazing." "There must be 1,000 people out there," Melody said, peeking through the curtain at the crowd gathered on the great lawn, families with picnic blankets, couples on dates, music lovers of all ages, all waiting to hear her play. 1,500 according to the organizers, said Mr. Davis, appearing at the dressing room door. Once just her boss, he had gradually taken on the role of unofficial manager, helping her navigate the sudden interest in her talent. "And don't worry, you've played for packed houses at the Blue Note for weeks now. This is just a bigger venue, with no plates to carry," Zoe added with a grin. That made Melody smile. She still worked lunch shifts at the Blue Note twice a week, partly because she enjoyed it and partly to keep herself grounded. The restaurant's regular customers now treated her like a minor celebrity, often asking for her autograph on their napkins or menus. 5 minutes. "Ms. Parker," called the stage manager, poking his head into the room. Mr. Davis patted her shoulder. "We'll be in the front row. Just do what you always do, play from the heart." As they left, Melody took a deep breath and closed her eyes. So much had changed so quickly. The interview with City Arts Magazine had led to others: local radio, a feature in the city paper, even a short segment on a regional TV news program. Tom Reynolds had made good on his offer, and she had recorded a demo at his label's studio the previous month. They were talking about a full album now, a mix of classical and jazz standards, but most surprisingly, she had started composing again. Ideas for original pieces had begun flowing after years of creative silence. It was as if the act of returning to the piano had opened not just a door to her past, but a window to a future she hadn't dared imagine. A gentle knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting the stage manager again. Instead, it was Barbara Whitmore, elegant as always in a cream-colored pantsuit, her silver hair perfectly styled. "I hope I'm not intruding," Mrs. Whitmore said. "I just wanted to wish you luck before you go on." "Thank you," Melody replied. "And thank you for the opportunity. I wouldn't be here without your recommendation to the Arts Council." Mrs. Whitmore waved away her gratitude. "Nonsense. You'd be here regardless. Talent like yours finds its way to the spotlight eventually. She hesitated, then added, though I admit, I might have helped speed things along a bit. There was a warmth to her tone that Melody had come to recognize over their many interactions in recent months. Behind the polished exterior was a woman who genuinely loved music and had dedicated much of her life to supporting the arts in their city. Why did you? Melody asked, curious. After I ruined your dress that night, Mrs. Whitmore smiled. Do you know what I did before I married George? I was a piano teacher. Not quite at your level. I never had the gift you have, but I understood what it meant to love music. She stepped closer, adjusting one of the pins in Melody's upswept hair with a motherly touch. When I heard you play that night, I recognized something I'd seen in only a handful of students throughout my teaching career. Something special that deserves to be heard. Before Melody could respond, the stage manager appeared again. It's time, Ms. Parker. Mrs. Whitmore squeezed her hand. They're waiting for you. Go shine. Walking onto the outdoor stage was unlike anything Melody had experienced before. The evening sun cast a golden glow over the audience, making the scene before her look almost dreamlike. A magnificent grand piano stood at center stage, spotlights already trained on its gleaming surface. As she took her seat, adjusting the bench to her preferred height, a hush fell over the crowd. She could see Mr. Davis and Zoe in the front row as promised. Next to them sat Pete, who had closed the bar early to attend. Even Kathy was there, sitting a few rows back. Their relationship had evolved into a grudging mutual respect. In the back of her mind, Melody could almost feel her grandmother's presence, proud, encouraging, loving. Mrs. Whitmore introduced her with a few gracious words about new talent and the importance of second chances, then stepped aside. The microphone was positioned near the piano so Melody could speak if she wished. She leaned forward slightly. Thank you all for coming tonight, she said, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. Music has been my companion through the best and worst times of my life. It left me for a while, or perhaps I left it. But we found our way back to each other. This first piece is something new, something I wrote about that journey. I call it Coming Home. As her fingers touched the keys, the world around her both expanded and contracted. Expanded to include every person listening. Contracted until there was nothing but the music flowing from her hands. The piece began softly, hesitantly, like someone testing unfamiliar ground. Then it built, gathering confidence and strength, weaving in hints of classical training with jazz-inspired improvisations that reflected her nights at the Blue Note. When the final chord faded into the summer air, there was a moment of perfect silence followed by thunderous applause that seemed to shake the stage beneath her feet. The rest of the concert passed in a blur of music and emotion. She played pieces from across the spectrum, Bach to Brubeck, Chopin to Korea, each selection showcasing a different facet of her ability. For her encore, she returned to Debussy's Clair de Lune, the piece that had captivated the remaining customers at the Blue Note on that fateful night 3 months ago. After the final bow, after the standing ovation that seemed to go on forever, after the backstage congratulations and flowers, Melody found a quiet moment alone. She slipped away from the post-concert reception and walked to the edge of the park where she could see the city lights reflecting on the river. There you are, came a voice behind her. It was Tom Reynolds, holding 2 glasses of champagne. He offered one to her. Hiding from your admirers? Melody accepted the glass with a small smile, just taking a moment to breathe. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the boats on the river. Their relationship had evolved from that awkward apology into a professional partnership with hints of something more, though neither had acted on it yet. The label loved the demo, Tom said finally. They want to move forward with the album. Full studio, full promotion. Melody nodded. I'd like that. And there's interest from some venues in other cities. Nothing too ambitious to start. Small concert halls, jazz clubs, that sort of thing. But it could be the beginning of a tour if you wanted. A tour. The word hung in the air between them, full of possibility and challenge. 6 months ago, Melody had been struggling to pay rent, carrying plates invisible to the world. Now people were talking about albums and tours and concert halls. What about the Blue Note? She asked. The restaurant had become more than just a workplace. It had become the setting for her second chance. I spoke with Davis earlier, Tom said. He's already thinking about hiring another pianist for when you're away. But he made it clear your spot is always there when you're in town. Melody smiled at that. Loyal to the end, Mr. Davis. You don't have to decide tonight, Tom continued. But the opportunity is there when you're ready. Ready, was she ready? The question echoed in her mind as she sipped her champagne. From the distance came the sounds of the reception. Laughter, conversation, the clink of glasses. She could hear Zoe's distinctive laugh. Could picture Mr. Davis telling the story of how he'd discovered her talent. A story that grew more dramatic with each telling. Melody thought about the path that had led her here, the years of training, the sacrifice for her grandmother, the humiliation of that night when they'd laughed at her, the triumph when she'd shown them who she truly was. Every step, every choice, every moment had been necessary to bring her to this place. I think I am ready, she said softly, more to herself than to Tom. But I don't want to forget where I came from. The waitress who ruled the show, Tom said with a smile. Raising his glass in a toast, Melody laughed. Is that how people tell it? It's already becoming a local legend, he replied. The waitress they laughed at until she touched the piano and ruled the show. People love a good comeback story, and it was a comeback, Melody realized. Not just to music, but to herself, to the person she was always meant to be, even when life had other plans. As they walked back toward the reception, Melody caught sight of a young woman serving drinks to the guests, moving with the slightly anxious efficiency of someone new to the job. Their eyes met briefly and Melody gave her an encouraging smile, remembering how it felt to be in her shoes. In that moment, standing between her past and her future, Melody felt a sense of completion. The circle that had begun when she'd first touched the piano at the Blue Note was closing. But it wasn't an ending. It was a new beginning. The last rays of sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and gold as Melody rejoined her friends, her supporters, her new family. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new music, new opportunities. But tonight was for celebrating how far she'd come, from invisible to unforgettable, from background to spotlight, from the one they laughed at to the one they cheered for. The waitress had indeed ruled the show. And this was just the opening act.